Hello everyone, today I bring to you the Lesney Matchbox number 58C girder truck. As you can see, someone has repainted this one gold, and there's even red underneath. It's on the tires and on the windshield. So first step is going to be to remove the rivet. Now I'm going to use this number 50 drill bit to drill into the rivet in the base and get like a pilot hole started, and that should help me when I go to tap it to get the hole a little deeper once I've drilled the head off the rivet, and it will help guide the drill bit when I drill the head off the rivet. And here I have the larger drill bit. I usually use a number 12 drill bit, and I'm just removing the head from the rivet, and that will allow me to remove the base. And just like that, the base comes right on off. Takes a second, and there it goes. And as you can see, there's a little bit of paint on it, and the axle was quite rusted. And here I show you, you can see that there's a pin in the top of the windshield, but it's not holding it in place like a rivet. Looks like they might have forgotten to mushroom that post over at the factory, because usually those are mushroomed over. Windshield has paint on it, so that's going to need to get cleaned. And I show you again, here are the tires. They have red and gold paint on them that need to be removed. And there's that rusty axle there. I was originally intending on not removing it, but later in the restoration, I ended up having to remove it so that I could clean up the axle a little bit better. So now the next step will be to remove the mushrooms on the end of these axles. So to do that, I use a stone wheel and the Dremel and just simply grind them off. And once that burr has been fully removed, the wheel comes right off and you can slide the axle out. I then repeat this process for the rest of the wheels. Now, as I referred to in the beginning, that post there needs to be drilled out so I can put a screw in and tap it and everything. So I just file that flat so that it's not sharp and I can get a good even surface. And then I get prepared to drill it. So I now have my number 50 drill bit once again, and I just place it back into the hole and drill it out deep enough for my screw to fit. So as you can see, I have a nice deep hole that I drilled out with that little drill bit in the Dremel. And now I get out my tap. I use a 2-56 tap to make the threads in this hole, and make sure to use some oil to always lube it well. I've broken off a couple taps in the past, so I always remember to put a lot on. Well, you don't want to do too much though, because that can build up hydraulic pressure in the post. According to some YouTubers, I've never had issues with it, but apparently it can happen. I also I usually sometimes end up using 2 taps, because I have one tap that I had broken off and I cut it off flat, and I use that as a tap that can go a little deeper since it doesn't have the tip on it, but sometimes I have to use a tip because you need a starting tap to get the threads to start. And now that it has threads in it, I just put the screw in place using a little Allen wrench, and if it sits flush with the post, then I know I've gone deep enough. So the next step is now paint stripper. So I applied some aircraft paint stripper to the model, and now I will spread it around with a little toothbrush, and that should remove almost all the paint that's on it right now. So these plastic parts all have a lot of paint on them, so I've got some brake fluid from my truck when I worked on my brakes that was extra, and I'm going to try to use that to clean some of the paint off. Unfortunately, as you're going to later see, I didn't have very good luck with this, as most people usually make it a little bit better. So what I ended up doing in the end was sanding down the windshield and repainting the tires, and it came out pretty good. Luckily, I was able to remove a bit of the paint on the base, so that looks a little bit better at least. I even tried to soak the tires and the windshield in some brake fluid, but unfortunately it still didn't really help clean it up any. So I guess I don't know if I used the wrong type of brake fluid or what exactly I did wrong, but it didn't work very well for me. So here is the windshield after I sanded it. Now I ended up using a couple different grits. I used I think 1,000 and 2,000, and I may have used a little bit of 600 or 800 before those, but it removed the scraps of paint that I had on there. And here's the model after it's been sitting with the paint stripper for about a half an hour. So I put it in some water and scrubbed it down with the toothbrush to remove all the loose paint. And before I say it, I do know I should be wearing gloves here, but for some reason I didn't. So please, if you're ever doing this, wear some gloves. Now, in order to remove the last few scraps of paint, I use these different picks and dental picks, which help me get the little paint scraps out of the spots that it's hard for the paint stripper to get into and it's hard to reach. So I attached each of the wheels to a little toothpick, and this is when I decided to remove those wheels in order to do that as well. So I got them all set, and I stuck them into sponges, and I used some tire wash, which is the Tamiya Black, mixed with a bunch of the thinners that go on over the tires and make them look a lot nicer. I then decided it was time to polish the windshield, so I use a cotton wheel in the Dremel, and I use some of that clear coat polish compound, I believe it's called, and I just put a little on with my finger, spread it on the windshield, and run the Dremel with it, and it shines it up pretty nice. And there we go. As you can see, it's quite a bit shinier than it was before, and overall looks pretty good. I ended up washing it over a little bit better so I could remove some of the threads from the cotton wheel that get on it. So now, as I was looking at this model, you can see it's bent in a couple spots. And those spots are the stake kind of piece right there, and then that little piece of the deck in the back there. And I could see that the edge up there was really rough, that I didn't really like. There's also a rough edge in the back that I was looking at. I don't know if I showed you that. But so my plan was to file the rough edges and to apply heat to the model and bend it back into position. So to do that, I got out a heat gun and some gloves, even though those aren't heat-proof gloves, so I'd recommend better gloves if you're doing this. Now, I heated up the model and used my little hammer to bang the pieces back into shape, and I used like the side of the workbench and some a little bit on my vise, I believe. So I did the rest of the heating up and bending back off camera, and as you can see, it's not perfect, but it's definitely an improvement. That stake in the back is quite a bit straighter, and the deck doesn't look quite as bent as it did before. I haven't filed it yet, as I show you the back there where it's rough and the top. So now I have to get out a file, and I'll just go over those rough edges to make it look just a little bit nicer. So now I have out my brass wheel, and I'm going to use that to shine up the model a little bit and prep it for painting. Once I finished with the brass wheel, I used these two brushes here to get into the spots that I couldn't reach in the model with the brass wheel. And this is the result. I think it came out pretty good. Now it should be all ready for paint after I wash it off to make sure there's no dust on the surface. So the axles that came off the model are quite rusty and don't look that great. So what I do is I stick them into the Dremel and I run them over some sandpaper, and that should shine them up and make them look quite a bit better. So now it is time to apply the paint using an airbrush. So I got some Mr. Hobby paint, as you can see, and it's pretty close to the color. I'm using the Tamiya thinners with it because I believe they're compatible. And there is the model with the primer on it. So it came out pretty good with the primer. I like the way it looks. So now it's time to paint it all up. And here is the result after painting. I think that came out pretty good, even though it is a little orange peely. When the bottom did not come out as good as I wanted it to, which is unfortunate. I had an issue with a run. So I'm going to try to clean that up a little bit better, but I'm not going to repaint it. Spent a lot of time with that. My airbrush was having some issues while I was doing it, so I made the best of it. And this is also one of my least favorite style castings to paint because it's so difficult to get in all the wheel wells and everything. So here's all the parts. I'm just going to, all I have to do is reform these axles and then put the screw in for the base. To reform the axles, I have to put it into a tool in my drill press, which is right here. I usually use a different tool, but in there right now I have a little nail that has a hole drilled in it. I have that in there because the other tool won't quite fit. And the nail can get quite a bit closer. I use that nail on the bottom because it helps hold the nail in the model in place so that it doesn't slip off or the wheel can't fall out of place with the axle. That's the other tool I use. You can see the holes drilled in there. So now it is time to complete the assembly. All the wheels are on, and now I'll set the windshield in place using that little thing inside that was supposed to hold in place. I still don't understand why the factory didn't mushroom that over. But then the base goes on, just like that. The grill has to slide in front into place. Then I have to take the little screw that I left in when painting so that it would match the color of the model. And it always takes me a minute to get the screws in. But and there we go. So this is what the truck looked like before we started. As you can see, it was covered in gold. There was red underneath the gold, and it was bent in a few places, and really looked kind of bad. But now, it looks like this. Hope you enjoyed watching this restoration. Hope to have many more to come. And hope you leave a like and subscribe to the channel and watch some more of my restorations. Thank you.